Welcome to another episode of Escalation, where we delve into the challenges faced by frontline countries and the critical role of diplomacy in navigating today's complex global landscape. Our guest today is none other than Thórdís Gylfadóttir, Iceland's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and a distinguished voice in international relations. Thórdís has been at the forefront of shaping Iceland's foreign policy, particularly during a time when Arctic and North Atlantic regions are growing in strategic importance and are mired in an increasing geopolitical uncertainty. As a leader, she has championed support to Ukraine, human rights and sustainability, as well as Iceland's active role in global cooperation. In this conversation, we'll explore her tenure as foreign minister, Iceland's unique position in global diplomacy, and her thoughts on how small nations can make a significant impact on the world stage. Thórdís, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First of all, we had this conversation a number of times where I tried to explain that Iceland has a very special place in Lithuania's heart, because in 1991, in February, just after probably the worst time during our beginning of our independence, where Russia used its force against Lithuania in 1991 January. So a month later, Iceland decided to recognize Lithuania as an independent country. No other countries joined. Iceland, as far as we're told, suffered sanctions. Some salmon was refused to enter Soviet Union's market. But now almost every Lithuanian that you would meet in Lithuania would tell you that Iceland was the first. We have Iceland Street in Vilnius. We are celebrating Iceland Day every June. And for me, it is a really special honor to have you on the show and to have this possibility to talk with you. What I would like to start with, because I presented you as a former minister already, could you explain a little bit about the political situation in Iceland? I understand that you had elections. You are now in opposition, but in the parliament. Could you tell what is happening in Iceland?
Yes, well, thank you. We had early elections late November. They were supposed to be this fall, this year, but we called for an early election. And the three-party government, one party is out of parliament. The second one lost 8 members out of 13, and we lost 2. So the Social Democrats got 15, we got 14. And they formed the government with the Liberals and a party called the People's Party. So now I'm in opposition after 8 years in government, which is, the natural thing in democracies. And it's a new role for me because I've been a member of parliament for 8 years, but I've never been, I've been the minister the whole time. So it's a new role. And the parliament starts next week.
I've tried translating the latest Icelandic news, and at least the translation says that you are, at least reviewing your political future. Could you explain what does it mean? Maybe that was a wrong translation.
Well, that means that, I've been a deputy leader of my party for 7 years now, and I had said for the last 2 years, answering that question quite often, whether I would run for leadership when the leader would resign or leave politics, which he has now done. So almost everyone, I think, assumed that I would run. For many reasons, I decided not to. It doesn't mean that I'm leaving politics. I'll be in the Foreign Committee and I can continue to use a different platform, but hopefully new platforms with everything that's going on around us. And it's evolving and developing quite fast. I hope and I believe that I can use my voice differently.
That's very good to hear that you're planning to continue to do that further. I think it's very, very important because the world always needs more freedom fighters, not less. One of the things that caught my attention was that one of the parties that won the election and is now forming a government has declared that Iceland will try again knock on the European Union's door. At least from where I stand, it's a big thing. I know that Iceland has tried that in the past. It was stopped. Maybe you can expand a little bit about what was the debate at home, but clearly there is not much debate about this in Europe. And can this happen in reality?
Well, the last time we had a government, Social Democrats and Left Greens, and they decided to basically apply for membership, and it took 4 years, and then it stopped with a new government. But during that time, you had, the Social Democrats were pro-EU, but the other one was not. So it wasn't really a great, start when you don't have an alignment or a united front from the government. Now we have a three-party government, and the Liberals are very pro-EU, and it was their focus, and they got it through. The Social Democrats are pro-EU, but they weren't that enthusiastic to put it on the agenda. And then you have the third party that is against. I would assume that the reason why it's maybe not that much debated yet in Brussels is that they want to see how serious is the new government about this. It's on the agenda to have a referendum in 2 years' time. And the question would be, basically, would you prefer Iceland to continue the work since earlier? So that is even debated in Iceland, whether that is realistic. Is the application, dead or alive? Should the question rather be, do you want to join the European Union? Which would be, in my personal opinion, that would make more sense to just ask that question. But the discussion and debate in Iceland is often, we should look what's in the package. What would it mean for us? How can we negotiate? One of the big things, as you probably know, is regarding fisheries. And that, for example, was one of the chapters that was never opened the last time after 4 years. But then again, when we see fast developments and changes around us, I don't know how the world will look like in 2 years. I mean, a couple of years ago, I would have said, that's almost obvious. It will be pretty much the same. But when 1 week is like a couple of years in development, I can't say how the world will look like, or Europe or the Nordic or the Arctic in 2 years' time.
Are people interested in joining EU?
It goes up and down. There is a debate, and it's around 50-50, sometimes 60-40, even 70-30, but it depends on what is happening. I mean, we are a country that quite often has quite high inflation, which obviously bothers people. We have our own currency, which is obviously tiny, but it gives us a different kind of flexibility. We do our own free trade agreements through EFTA. We're part of EA, so we're part of the single market. In my opinion, the best of things through close cooperation with the European Union, but we still control what we want to control. But now we see the European Union developing. There's an increased discussion on security and defense and the future role of the European Union, the relationship between US and basically the rest, I mean, Europe as a whole, but obviously Iceland as well. We have a bilateral defense agreement with the US. We're the only member of NATO that doesn't have an army. We're a founding member of NATO. So I think it will also depend on how these issues will develop in the next 2 years.
It is interesting that just recently Norway's government collapsed, actually, because of discussion about Europe and implementing certain energy rules that are imposed, so to say, from Brussels. So it will be very interesting to see what you're saying about the geopolitics pushing us one direction or the other. Clearly, I mean, 5 years ago, few could have guessed that Sweden and Finland will be part of NATO. I would like here to switch to another topic. It's Russia's war against Ukraine. And clearly, as we spoke before, that you were in the forefront when it comes to support. And I always wondered, how do you explain it yourself? For us, at least for us in Lithuania, it is natural to see the comparison. 1991, Iceland supports Lithuania. 2022, Iceland supports Ukraine. So it's like a tradition. How would you explain, the strong upfront position?
I do think, and I hope it connects to our history and previous decision making. I would say that when it comes to the full scale invasion, it's your core belief of what is right and what is wrong. So for me, it was never a question that we would be in the forefront. Of course, acknowledging our limits. I mean, we do not have any weapons to send because we just don't have them. But we have other means. We have the symbolic support, economic support, humanitarian assistance, and chipping in also in defense-related support from other nations. There's a big support of the Icelandic public in this regard as well. For me, it's basically the least you can do. I mean, we have a tiny population. We have a very good quality of life. We are expert-driven. We understand that we stand on the ground of the rule-based international order, and for that to be protected is very, very important to us. And we understand that it's not a cliche when we say the Ukrainians are fighting our fight. We understand that if Russia gets away with this, what would that mean for the region, the rest, and the system? Because we understand that we do not stand a chance in Putin's world. And again, I would say it's it's basically the least we can do. I mean, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we do this? Why wouldn't we do what we can to support? There are not many things in complicated world that is black or white, but this comes pretty close to it. And also, I would say that you also are influenced by strong voices, and we've discussed this quite often. It is also a value-based foreign policy. So when you say, that you are inspired by Icelandic value-based policy, I would say vice versa, because when we now see the countries with the strongest voice, that is also something, that's where we want to belong. That's where we want to be. And I am very thankful that the new government is totally aligned in this regard. And the new Minister for Foreign Affairs is excellent in this and completely will continue the good work, I trust.
Remind us, if you can, Iceland is one of the few countries in the world that has closed its embassy in Moscow. How that decision came to happen, as much as you can tell us?
Well, it is controversial in Iceland. It was a decision that I made, and I believe it was the right one. We didn't have any, trade relations almost. We didn't have a lot of diplomatic relations. We didn't have cultural relations. We do not have many Icelanders living there. Why would they need over 20 people working there? And then, of course, as you know, it is complicated and a challenge to be in Moscow when you're working for countries like ours. And we basically suspended operations in Moscow. We did not close down the embassy, meaning that it can be opened again if and when the time is right. Many in Iceland think that we basically cut ties with Russia or we closed it down. That did not happen. What we have to do, we continue to do, and we have relations there, but we suspended operations. And I believe it was the right decision, and time will tell. I wasn't criticized much at first, and then it increased, which is also interesting, but I believe it was the right decision.
But that's very interesting. What you're saying about that there is some controversiality, in this question. Does it extend also to how Iceland should treat Ukraine and assistance to Ukraine, or kind of the whole situation surrounding war?
It does. Both with regards to the amount of support, which still, unfortunately, is less than the other Nordic countries. But first and foremost, it's regarding the defense-related support, because we made decisions to support Ukraine also through defense, even though we do not physically have the weapons to send, but we've done so. And again, that was, a priority for me because it was the right thing to do in a situation where you don't only do what you feel good about. I think it's a part of the mentality in Iceland. I mean, we're a country that doesn't have an army, and the misunderstanding, I would say, with all due respect, that we are such a peace-loving country that we shouldn't support, a nation with weapons. We should support it by other means. And I would say we do that. We also support Ukraine with other means. But if you support Ukraine in defending themselves, that means they need weapons to defend themselves. And this, again, was not that much criticized at first, but I guess it takes time also for people to digest it, and then the debate increased. And then, of course, you have in Iceland, as elsewhere, you have social media and all sorts of information and bots and stuff. And so it has increased. I took political hit for it, but I would say here as well, time will tell. And I am confident. I believe that was the right decision. Why wouldn't we do what every ally is doing? If we had the weapons, we would send them. So why wouldn't we use other means to do exactly that?
Did you have a political party or politicians who would really go against support, like what we're seeing in German debate, where parties like really far either to the right or to the left, or you don't have that?
We do not have the extreme examples of that, and we do not have a party in parliament with those views. But through the campaign, we had parties that were running, but they didn't reach the threshold, so they're not represented in the parliament.
Okay. My next subject that I wanted to talk about is Greenland, but I would like to take a step back from it and then ask. I would frame it very simplistically. What is happening with Arctic? Iceland being one of the Arctic countries clearly plays a role here. You sat in Arctic councils and discussed, probably even with Russians, right? What is happening there. So actually, what is happening in the Arctic?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First of all, after the full-scale invasion, the foreign ministers within the Arctic Council, we do not meet because we do not meet with the Russians. And in the Ottawa Declaration, it says that the Arctic Council can't make a formal decision without having everyone around the table. That doesn't mean that there's not work being done, but on the highest level, it's not functioning since the full-scale invasion started. Second, it's a huge region, and you have the interest of indigenous people, you have the climate change, and which will mean that routes that are still closed will open up, and it will change it dramatically. And then you have the vision that we always say in the high north there's low tension, and we want to keep it a low tension area. But even 3 years ago at Munich Security Conference, I had this debate, like we can say low tension in the high north, but what if it isn't or it won't be? You can't have a policy on something if that's not the reality. And what is good and bad? Arctic issue is always getting higher and higher on the agenda outside of the Arctic countries for obvious reasons. So now with Greenland and that debate, which came quite fast and kind of surprising, at least the pressure and the strength and how it has changed a lot of things, which we thought would not change. I believe we will see a lot of change in the Arctic. We do want to keep it a low tension area. It's huge. It's a challenge, and there is and there will be an increased interest from other states as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the bigger embassies in Reykjavik, if I remember correctly, is actually embassy of China, People's Republic of China.
Yes.
And clearly, partially is obviously because of cultural ties and political conversations. But I think that there's probably Arctic question in this as well. They are interested already. I would guess that trade is one of the questions, right? As you say that, the routes will open, but also being present, right? Hearing, participating in the conversation. And also there is an element of security. North Atlantic, there's a reason why Iceland was a founding member of NATO.
Mm-hmm.
You are at the center of North Atlantic, and clearly countries like China has an interest in that. In many cases, we are seeing PRC more assertive, more proactive. I would even say, aggressive in their behavior, not asking, not apologizing, but basically being just there and defending their own interest, whatever the cost. How is it seen from Iceland's perspective?
It is true. The Chinese embassy is, at least with diplomats, the biggest one. Altogether, maybe the US one, but with diplomats, it's the Chinese one. I mean, we have a free trade agreement with China. We have good relations with China. There is a common misunderstanding, especially in the US, that there is big investment in critical infrastructure or land or something in Iceland from the Chinese. That's not the case. And it's true what you say. I mean, obviously, they are there and they have interest and they look at the Arctic and we know about their interest there. That has been the case for many years. The relationship between China and Russia has developed and changed. And of course, it raises questions on what does that possibly mean for the Arctic. So we need to be vigilant in that regard. But again, with the changes in the Arctic, when it comes to opening routes and more trade and investments, that will definitely bring changes. And in that respect, of course, it makes sense to look at Greenland and think about the future development there.
How surprised were you when that question suddenly became part of everyday debate?
Last time the Greenlandic people answered his words by saying, Greenland is not for sale, but we're open for business. And that hasn't changed. And their willingness to become independent has only increased in Greenland. They have the right to choose their future, just like everyone else. But what surprised me was when you say you don't rule out using force to get what you want. Obviously, that was a surprise because we are talking about closest friends and allies. We're talking about Denmark, which is also a founding member of NATO, one of the US strongest allies in all aspects. And the escalation, you could say, in the debate and discussion has been quite big. And I think it's important that everyone just takes a deep breath and figure out ways to have that dialogue and debate on common interest and how we can do this as grown-ups. I mean, Greenland wants partnership, want to close their physical gap. They want to become independent. They have interest. They have resources. They are also strategically important with their location, just as we are, and only increasing because of the developments in the Arctic and the climate change. And they are, people as well with their rights, and they are not for sale. They want to become independent, not a part of another country.
If you were to give an advice, what to prepare for and how to prepare for what might come, what your advice would be?
Is the glass half full or half empty? I mean, I do worry about quite a lot of things, and it's only increasing. I would advise us and everyone to remind ourselves about what's the most important thing. We have a system that has increased the quality of life of everyone that belongs to that system. We've went through decades of more peace than we've seen in history. We can never be complacent. We cannot take that for granted, as we obviously see now. I would advise everyone, and us included, to be creative, to think outside the box, and to have the courage to lead the way we believe is right. I think there's a big need for leadership. I think there's a big need for leaders that are, courageous and say what has to be said, and that we really listen to each other and find solutions for us to continue to keep the world order and the system that was created and was not supposed to be able to, be broken and is now being attacked. That the least we can do as allies is to stick together and not create big problems among ourselves.
You mentioned a little bit about this, answering previous question about the needs of the people of Greenland. You are, geographically, you're really close. I'm sure that you have, contacts and political contacts, probably almost better than anybody else, outside Denmark. We've just seen the latest polls coming from Greenland. Most of the people do not want to change their identity. They do not want to become Americans in any way. But then when asked the question whether you think that it is a positive thing what President Trump is kind of thinking, I think 60% of them say, yeah, it is positive. So it's very interesting. Maybe you can explain a little bit.
It's coming from the fact that they want a faster development in reaching their goals, which is becoming independent. It's not a political taboo that, the nation wants to become independent. For that to happen, they need more trade and investments. They need to close the fiscal gap. And I assume that this discussion is, puts that on the agenda, and it might move the debate and discussion further. It also means that Denmark now has a different focus and maybe a different approach to the whole thing. We have a very good relationship with the Greenlandic people and Greenlandic government. I mean, we only became independent in 1944. We were also part of Denmark. I'm not comparing, Iceland to Greenland and the history and the relationship, but I would say that we are equals. We have good cooperation, increasingly so as well. They want to be able to decide for themselves what kind of society they want to build, and they have a vision for that, and they want partnership, and they want more trade, and they want investments, and they want to increase their quality of life, and they can because they are rich. It's just still, hasn't been utilized. So I understand where that comes from, but I also understand that they are worried, and this again means that everyone that shares the same values and will have to work together on that, and that includes, Greenland, Denmark, neighboring countries, allies, because we should all aim for the same thing.
Do you think that this conversation can hasten the independence movement in Greenland?
I think so.
And when it comes to the discussion in Iceland, has there been official statements by the government or by the politicians? How do Icelanders see it?
I would say that we basically see it very clearly. I mean, the future of Greenland is in the hands of the Greenlandic people. And it's not a great conversation starter for your biggest ally to say that it's going to buy a land that is not for sale, and it's not even for Denmark to sell, and that you do not rule out using force. I mean, that's not the best conversation starter you can have. If the goal is a closer cooperation, partnership, investments, increased trade, and you look at Greenland as a strategically important location, we all agree on that. And I know that there are ways to reach those goals without saying that you are just going to buy it and take it, and you do not rule out using force.
What I'm worried about a little bit is that, at least from the European Union perspective, it feels like the question itself is a bit like taboo. Countries are freaked out. They don't know, how to handle it, and it's better not to talk about it. There is a feeling that Denmark is alone in this, that they don't have, they don't have backing. And it's not about bilateral backing that I'm talking about, but, there is a reason why we are part of EU. Because you have this, huge commission, very strong laws and regulations and directives and whatnot. And they kind of have this wall where you say if the country that is in. Nobody's alone there to have this discussion, because it's impossible to have this discussion when your, debate partner is, 20 times larger or whatever. So kind of I have this loneliness a little, that I don't think that it's useful. And in Lithuania, we felt that as well when, standing up to China. It was a difficult thing. Okay, so that's basically it from my side. I wanted to ask, just to finish up with a question. So what's the situation now with volcanoes?
Well, it's not active right now, at least not, last time I checked a couple of hours ago. But it's not over. It will probably continue. And what we are looking at now is even other areas, other regions as well. You have to be a resilient society in different, aspects than in Lithuania, but
standing up against the nature.
Yeah, we are. And Mother Nature, she controls this, and there's no diplomatic magic tricks that you can use in that regard.
Well, thank you so much. That was a very interesting conversation. All the best to you in your future endeavors. For everybody else who watched, if you like, please subscribe and wait for other episodes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.